At the Rigarden Magical Academy, the only thing that matters is talent for sorcery, and those who lack this gift are despised by both students and masters. Wil Serfort of the Rizanth race is one of these humiliated students, but his determination keeps him from giving up on finding his place in the sun, even though his real talent remains invisible to those around him. In search of answers, he continues to venture into the dungeons to hone his skills with his faithful sword, Wil's companion, that compensates for his lack of magical ability. Set in the magical capital of Rigarden, this academy for sorcerers offers lessons on the properties of elements and how they can be used to invoke spells. One of the institution's teachers, Wil Serfort, explains how to catalyze a bright flame using balka ore and agni powder. To demonstrate, Edward calls on Wil, who along with his familiar Kiki was distractedly sketching in his notebook. Startled, he responds to the summons with some reluctance, knowing he would likely fail the task once again. As his classmates laugh and await his failure, Wil hesitates before beginning the catalysis until he receives a final nudge from the professor, who also seemed doubtful of the young student. Sure enough, Wil Serfort fails to perform one of the simplest procedures, causing the class to burst into laughter, except for one girl. Impatient, Edward highlights to the entire class that a student of the institution is incapable of using even the most basic magic. Without mincing words, he states that Wil is beyond saving. Sion Ulster, sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, unleashes a flame that nearly explodes the classroom bench. The professor reprimands the boy, who with a cynical tone claims he was just trying to help a fellow student who's not at his best. After that, Edward casts a spell that dissipates the flames and emphasizes that the supremacy of magic in this world is absolute, and that the heroes of this civilization have always been and always will be mages. Therefore, what determines your worth in this place is your aptitude for sorcery. With that said, he finally invites all those who have dreams greater than what can be achieved here to leave. After yet another failed class, Wil sighs deeply as Sion approaches with two friends, Lyral Mars and Gordon Barrett. As always, the talented mage belittles his classmate, mentioning the boy's expedition into the dungeons to defeat those weak monsters. At that moment, Wil's only true friend, Colette Loire, steps in to put an end to the nonsense. For a moment, Sion is intimidated by the girl's determination, but he quickly resumes his tough guy stance, asserting that effort is not enough to develop in sorcery, much less to become a Maja Vander. With that, he leaves, recalling Professor Edward's words about giving up. Afterward, Colette encourages her friend, saying that people are being ridiculous by making Wil the butt of their jokes, but he has come to accept it after swallowing for so long the notion that people without talent for magic are useless. Besides, as long as he has a beautiful girl like Colette to lean on, he considers himself a lucky guy. Taken aback, Colette complains that he always comes out with these things out of nowhere, so he justifies it by saying he learned to compliment women from a young age, and moreover, he wasn't lying when he said that his classmate is a beauty. Almost as if under a spell cast by Wil, the girl begins to blush with embarrassment and tells him to cut it out. Coming from a noble family, Colette Loire isn't supposed to act impulsively, but sometimes she just can't help it. Regardless, out of nowhere, Wil starts acting strangely, saying that today is a beautiful day. Colette adds that the Maja Vander, the most powerful mages, are surely protecting the sky. Speaking of which, a long time ago, people knew nothing about the sky as they were trapped in darkness. Terrorized by celestial invaders, one day, the world was blessed with the alliance of 5 mages who united to expel these enemies. By casting a seal on the sky, they were able to restore peace to civilization. Since then, the title of Maja Vander has been passed down as the highest honor among the sorcerer class, and every inhabitant of this land has dreamed of reaching that level at some point. Colette asks if the wand of the ice maiden Albusvina is looking after them today, and Wil is sure she is. He imagines her sitting near a window looking directly at them. With this image projected in his mind, he recalls his childhood when his friend Elfaria said that the sun and moon float in the real sky, and that on the other side of the sky there is a beautiful sunset that turns everything bright red. According to her, if you get as close to the sky as possible at the top of the tower, by becoming a Maja Vander, you can see the sunset. Excited by the story, Wil asks to see this scene with his friend one day, and the two make a promise. In his mind, it was just a silly promise between two kids, but he always believed it was possible to achieve. This belief proved true true as Elfaria became the youngest to earn the title of Maja Vander and ascended to the top of the tower. On the other hand, Wil relies solely on the strength of his promise to stay strong in the face of challenges which constantly remind him that he doesn't have the talent necessary to reach the top of the tower alongside his friend. And in the ebb and flow of these days, Professor Werkner Norgram scolds the student for going to the dungeon again, this time alone to the 7th floor. At this rate, Werkner is sure that Wil will die any day now. Brazenly, the student apologizes, but wants to know if he'll earn credits for the excursion. Werkner is annoyed with the boy, but since the death of an evil guardian was confirmed, he grants 2 credits to the student. Once the stubborn boy decided not to give up on becoming a Vander mage, the master warned him that before ascending the tower, Wil must advance to the Superior Institute. To do this, he needs many credits in each subject, writing, spellcasting, and practice. But since Wil is unable to earn credits in spellcasting, he has to find a way to compensate in the other areas. The young man doesn't seem disheartened by the news, but Werkner makes it clear that it's practically impossible to advance with practice credits alone. Moreover, the boy's graduation is at risk, so he must earn 4 credits by the end of the week to stay on track. Wil is shocked by this, as there are only 2 days left, so he opens a notebook right then and there to frantically research a monster that would give him the 4 credits he needs. Seeing the young man's distress, Werkner informs him that there is a Baskerville on the 6th floor and Wil gives him a grateful hug. Hearing the conversation from outside the room, Sion Ulster takes the opportunity to ruin Wil's career by hunting the creature on the 6th floor. Without delay, the protagonist heads to the location mentioned by the professor, believing he will defeat the Baskerville since he has faced one before, as long as he stays away from the flames that nearly turned Kiki into grilled cat. Meanwhile, alongside his friend, Sion has the same target, but his goal is to leave the boy he hates without the credits to graduate. Lyril asks if it is safe for them to go to the 6th floor alone, to which Sion makes it clear that not just anyone can do it. For some reason, only Wil Serfort's presence bothers him, and he will not allow a talentless failure to talk about being a Vander mage under his nose. Pursuing this, he turns to give instructions to his partners on how to deal with the Baskerville, but another creature arrives unannounced and introduces itself by smashing Gordon Barrett against the wall with a punch. Terrified Lyril Mars lets out a scream that can be heard by Wil and Kiki on the other side of the floor. Without thinking twice, the Rizanth dashes towards the sound and notices the terrible presence of an evil sentinel worth 10 credits. Meanwhile, Sion was trying to hit the monster with fire, but it has no effect on the opponent. The habitat of this type of creature is in the depths of the dungeons, so it makes no sense for it to be on the 6th floor. But now there's no point in thinking about what should be. The sentinel is in front of Sion Ulster and looks like it won't leave any of the boy's bones intact. Wil considers saving his classmate, but wonders if he has any obligation to do so after all the insults he has endured. A memory invades his consciousness where Elfaria said how kind and brave he was the same moment he received glasses as a gift from his friend. However, Wil doesn't believe he has these qualities. On the contrary, he considers himself an ordinary, shameful, and lonely person. Regardless, he puts on the glasses he received. Since he has no one by his side, his sword is like an extension of his body, like a solitary blade that traverses the dungeon with extraordinary skill. Meanwhile, Edward alerts Werkner that Sion and his group went to the dungeon, so he asks his colleague to use his familiar to find out the students' whereabouts. While preparing his animal, Werkner asks which floor they ended up on. When he is informed that the students are on the 6th floor, he says it is unnecessary to interfere because that is where Wil is. Swiftly moving between the rocky walls of the dungeon, Wil cuts the sentinel's finger with his Moria silver sword. The power of this blade allows the 6th-year student to cut in half the rocks thrown by the monster's uncontrollable power, keeping the boy in the battle in top form without any signs of being hit. Enjoying his remarkable speed, he leaps over the target and plants his weapon in the evil creature's shoulder, while Sion and Edward cannot believe this is the boy they despised so much. Werkner notes that Wil Serfort is a true irregular, possessing superhuman strength that no mage will ever have, with a physique as robust as a dwarf's and the intuition to to understand the enemy's strategy after seeing it only once. As if illuminated, Wil deciphers the enemy's movements in combat and remains intact with unmatched elegance. Then, using the momentum from his own dodge, he slashes the evil sentinel's right arm as if it were a string, causing the target's giant weapon to fall to the ground. In this world of mages, Wil is the only one capable of wielding this weapon, which weighs as much as 2 horses. In a last-ditch effort, the demon attacks with a lightning spell, but the Academy student masters the lightning's pressure and crushes the monster. Afterward, he extends his hand to his fallen classmate, but Sion Ulster's envious fury causes only a reaction of hatred. Seeing every movement of the fight from Werkner's magic sphere, Edward cannot accept that a student without magical abilities surpasses a prodigy sorcerer, so he leaves the room without further explanation. After everything that happened, Werkner welcomes Wil into his office with the sentinel's skull on his desk, so he could do nothing but award him the 10 credits he deserves. This is the story of a young man who would turn the world upside down, proving in a world where only magic is considered a true art that a union between wand and sword is possible, an alliance that would be known in the kingdom of Urbis Rigarden as Wistoria. 5 years ago, when he was 10, Wil was humiliated by all his schoolmates. According to many of them, the boy was just bait to attract Lady Elferia to the school. Now that she had become a Vandermage, everyone felt that this kid was no longer needed at the school. After all, he didn't even know how to use magic. Among everyone at the institution, only Professor Werkner seemed to support the boy. Accompanying him to a meeting with Cauldron Anuv, the headmistress, the tutor saw his pupil being presented with a sword, but immediately after he was attacked by numerous spells. Consequently, he threw the professor aside and dealt with each one of them. Seeing this, Cauldron allowed the young man to continue attending the academy, noting that a sword trying to be a wand was quite an interesting case. Wil wanted to know if he would be allowed to climb the tower if he continued studying there, and Cauldron explained that he needed to maintain an extraordinary willpower if he wanted to pursue that goal. Wiping away his tears, the boy adopted a determined expression and gripped the sword tightly as he made his way to the exit. Nowadays, in one of his classes, Werkner teaches the kids that the term "climb the tower" means advancing to the higher institute to become a Vandermage who reign on the top floor of the Mercedes Colleges. To be recognized by the highest center of learning, the higher institute, there are 2 main methods to advance. The first is to create a new type of magic, and the second is to earn at least 7,200 credits at the academy. Since few can achieve the first option, most have to strive for the second. Like it or not, graduation is not easy, and that's why Werkner gives so many extra classes. After one of these classes, Colette comments that the professor is being tough on the student. Wil feels this keenly as he is a disaster with magic, so he needs to focus 100% on credits to survive at the academy. However, the boy thinks Werkner does this for everyone's good because he wants everyone to have a chance to graduate. For instance, Colette thinks that Professor Edward doesn't have the same drive to give extra classes, so she agrees with her friend's point of view. As they walked together down the hallway, the 2 friends saw Lyral Mars saying in a circle that Sion had managed to defeat an evil sentinel, admiring the leader of this fake gang that tries to steal the credits of the true slayer of that powerful beast. Everyone in the group is impressed by the young prodigy's false feat, but he himself knows that none of it is true. On the contrary, Sion was saved by the last person he would want on this earth, the one he humiliated all his life, Wil Serfort. Speaking of the devil, as Wil was passing through the corridor, the cocky student broke through the circle and grabbed his classmate by the collar. After all, he swore Wil had no talent, yet he did what he did as if it were nothing. Colette came back to help her friend and told Sion to stop the nonsense. The guy clenched his fist, wanting to punch the boy who was so humiliated at the institution, but he restrained himself and let him go. As he walked away, his sycophants followed, so Colette asked if there was any beef between Wil and Sion to cause such a strange reaction from the guy. Wil replied that there was, but it was nothing major. Later, Edward tried to convince the headmistress that the boy with the sword needed to be expelled from school, but the woman reminded him that Serfort was in his 6th and final year at the school. The professor argued that a warrior should not be accepted at the institution, as it is known for training the greatest mages in existence. Therefore, it is impossible for someone to graduate without being able to use magic. Cauldron analyzed that the young man had good writing grades, and his reports had an interesting perspective, so much so that he stood out to the point where we can say he is more than excellent. Taking this into consideration, Cauldron noted that the boy could be a healer or an artificer even if he doesn't become a Vandermage. The headmistress reminded the staff that this school has a duty to train educated scholars for the fateful day, but Edward replied that the student in question has no intention of becoming a scholar, only a Vandermage. Cauldron admitted that this was a problem, so she asked Edward to test this student as he had discovered Wil's secret. The headmistress put Wil's promotion or expulsion in the hands of the professor. Edward questioned if that was really what she wanted because he wasn't as nice as Werkner, but Cauldron was certain of it, so she wanted Edward to test the student to the fullest and determine the truth for himself. After all, as the Dark Viper Mage, no one was better than this professor to understand potential Vandermages. Meanwhile, Wil Serfort needed Colette's help just to open his locker, as he couldn't use the simplest magic to unlock his personal compartment. Regardless, she didn't mind at all. Ironically, despite having his own characteristic, the boy couldn't carry his sword on campus, and if he returned to the dormitory Mr. Rosti, his roommate would never let him leave. Colette commented that the two seemed to get along well, but Wil responded unconvincingly that it was just a normal relationship. Later in the study room, we'll read that in the year 344 of the magical era, the Battle of Garzeranzo took place. In this conflict, the dwarves, a race from another world, became irritated with the exploitation and overwork and the treatment worse than that given to the elves, so they formed an army to free themselves from it. Seeing that the boy was studying something he had studied numerous times, his friend tried to give him a hint, but he was doing it on purpose because he was analyzing the perspective of other races in the historical context of the war. Colette praised her friend's writing talent, but that's why she thought he didn't need to try so hard. Anyway, Wil doesn't want to lose a single credit and miss the chance to fulfill his dream, so he wants to give his best. Besides, understanding how the dwarves felt in this battle is valuable in itself, because the Battle of Garzeranzo showed that the dwarves, even in the face of powerful magic, were able to fight, and this has a strong connection with what Serfort experiences in the day-to-day life of the school. One of the dwarves' sayings for this war was, "Never give up," and Wil takes that to heart. That said, Edward arrives to summon the student for the test in the spell hall. Once there, the teacher explains that he came to personally assess the student's worth, so he orders Wil to try to land a single blow on him. If he succeeds, he will receive 5 credits, but if he fails, he will be expelled from the academy. According to the teacher, those who do not have talent for sorcery should not even consider the possibility of becoming a Vandermage. At the same time, Headmistress Cauldron calls Werkner and reveals the confrontation happening at that very moment. She warns Werkner not to interfere in this test, because just as she allowed Werkner to make a special intervention with this student outside of the regular curriculum, Edward also has the right to put his method into practice, being such a respected mage. Werkner finds a test of this level unfair because Professor Ed was the closest of all to becoming a Vandermage. Living up to his name, Edward casts powerful spells against the inexperienced student, who dodges as best he can from those low-level dark magics, but they still exuded unmatched potency. Since his stay at the school is at stake, Wil doesn't want to lag behind in this duel, so he advances against his opponent with above-average speed. Even so, the teacher's defense proves impenetrable, and Ed protects himself without even having to move, maintaining distance through his magic. On top of that, Ed continues to disdain the student, reaffirming that he is hopeless. With that said, he casts a spell on the boy that breaks his glasses. After taking a heavy hit, Wil notices that the teacher is casting without reciting, activating his spells with frightening speed. As if that wasn't enough, the young man starts coughing up blood, and the fatigue of his body tells him that he won't even be able to scratch his rival. With the student on the ground, Edward warns that he will only use 2 spells, his black flames to burn and his shield to repel the boy's unpleasant savagery. Then, quoting one of the academy's doctrines, the teacher teaches that a student incapable of mastering 1,000 spells should strive to master a single one, and this single spell will become like 1,000 arrows. With that said, Ed overlaps several spells on top of just one, like an endless spiral of spells. Before unleashing all that magical mass on the student, he says that those without talent should disappear. Thus, the series of spells is relentlessly released and hits Wil Serfort with brutal force, leaving him no chance to react. For the first time, Wil faces a high-level mage and can't even wield his sword in in this test. In the locker room, Colette wonders if her friend is okay because she doesn't imagine a personal test from Ed for him being anything very beneficial. Actually, it's probably more like a torture session or something like that. Suddenly, Kiki appears bleeding and scratching Wil's locker, so Colette opens her friend's compartment to see what the familiar wants to convey with that. Meanwhile, Edward takes advantage of the fact that Wil was studying the Dwarf Rebellion to ask him how many mages it took to exterminate the 10,000 dwarves that rose up against the Order. Immediately, without letting the boy answer, he informs that only one sorcerer was enough because that's how the world works. For this reason, the teacher believes the young man should give up his stupid dream. On the other hand, no matter how the world is, Wil makes it clear that he does not intend to give up his goal. Holding the glasses given by Alferia, he states that he wants to be by the side of the person he loves by fulfilling the promise he made to Elfie. According to Edward, this desire is dirty and immoral, considering that a pathetic love cannot be the motivation to aspire to the pinnacle of sorcery. Not caring about the teacher's insults, Wil assures that he will see the sunset with his friend. At that moment, after being guided by Kiki, Colette throws the sword to him, and the feared blade of Moria cuts the spell cast by Ed right afterward. Mercilessly, the teacher unleashes a new magical onslaught that engulfs the student's body like a purple inferno. Wil's arms and legs begin to tremble, and he is certain he will be burned alive in the middle of the school. His desire is to run away to save his life, but doing so means his definitive expulsion from the academy, and consequently the end of his life's dream. Therefore, he advances through the magical obstacles imposed by his opponent and uses his blade as a torch in the darkness, making his way while reflecting that the Battle of Garzanoso has more details than Professor Edward wanted to tell. For instance, a brave dwarf general named Gareth fought even when he lost all his brothers, and despite everything struck a single blow against the enemy mage. In honor of his bravery, the mages began to recognize the dignity of the Dwarf Rebellion. That day became known as the day the sword overcame the wand. So as if he were Gareth, Wil Serfort uses his skills to break through the rival mage's blockade and make his face bleed with the sharp blade of Moria. Indignant, Ed withdraws and grants the 5 credits as a reward. In the headmistress's office, Cauldron and Werkner analyze the brilliantly executed strategy by the student and acknowledge that the young man is fearless. At night, in the vicinity of the Magic Academy, someone prepares a meal while waiting for Wil to join them for dinner. In those moments when he saw his friend leaving for the tower forever, Wil promised to do everything he could to be by her side. Alferia is eagerly waiting for this and doesn't hide her feelings. Tearfully before Professor Werkner, Wil declares that this will be his last time acting so pathetically. Back in the present, in the magical capital of Urbis Rigarden, more precisely on Slumland Street, Wil Serfort is giving his all to make up for his lack of talent in magic. With Kiki in his arms accompanying his hard work afternoons, the boy gains the recognition of the townspeople like Mr. Donnan, who notes that the boy is waking up early as always. On this day, clumsy as he is, Wil ends up tripping on a ladder and dropping one of the newspapers. In it, he reads that Alferia has just created a new original spell, being the first to achieve the remarkable feat of inventing 12 spells. This makes Wil proud, and he thinks he might do the same one day. Then he reads that the Ice Maiden has issued an order to the entire academy. Without wasting time, the swordsman rushes home and asks his roommate Rosti Noman to make a magic item for him. Rosti asks the reason for such agitation, and the boy explains that Elfie sent a request, and he can't afford to miss it. The task is to collect ice cores from the Frozen Wanderer, and since it requires many magical catalysts, the reward will be very good. The target is on the 4th floor, so Wil needs Rosti's magic items. Knowing his friend's explosive nature, Rosti laughs and hands him what he asked for. Queen Mercedes, one of the great pioneers, once said that everything is born from the dungeon, and that for this reason the children of magic must take the knowledge that resides there and follow their paths, transforming the unknown into known and conquering it. In the end, everything is connected. With these teachings in mind, Wil Serfort goes to the 4th floor of the dungeon alongside Kiki and realizes that the movement detachment of mages is already very large. After all, a personal order from Elfies could not cause any other effect but the immediate involvement of a large part of the academy. Among these students, the usual troublesome trio is making their presence known. While Sion's sycophants continue doing what they do best, the promising mage reflects that destroying these weak monsters is not enough because he can't get Wil out of his mind from that day he was saved by him, and presumes he needs to become much stronger if he wants to face that swordsman. Even Wil himself, witnessing Sion's performance on this mission, recognizes that the man is unstoppable, and for this reason he worries that Sion might take all the rewards for himself. So he goes deeper into the dungeon to face the more powerful creatures. In doing so, he encounters 3 giant penguins being extremely hostile to a girl. Without hesitation, the warrior draws his sword and cuts each one of them with unmatched ease, saving her. Frightened, the girl notices that this guy doesn't use magic but rather a sword. Putting that aside, she thanks him for his help and introduces herself as Iris Churchill. Back in the classroom, Wil is being taught precisely about the art of creating new spells. According to Professor Werkner, this is such a grand achievement that it guarantees unconditional advancement to the tower. These created spells are named after the creator or words associated with them. For example, the black magic spell Dax Darbicans was invented by a mage from ancient times, Brigadista Darbicans. In other words, whoever creates spells will have their name recorded in history forever. Rose Prehnite, a friend of Colette, asks if Lady Elferia, who was in the newspapers this morning, is as good as they say. To prove that she is, Werkner emphasizes that Elfie is the first to develop 12 original spells, placing her in the top tier of mages throughout history. With that said, Colette comments that Wil is trying to reach this childhood friend, and it won't be easy, especially since Elferia issued the order, causing the whole school to go crazy to fulfill the task. Rose teases her friend, saying she seems like a young maiden jealous of Wil's colleague. Colette gets upset and confronts her, but ends up getting scolded by Werkner and calms down. After that, she turns her attention to Elferia and wonders if Wil is in the dungeon again because of her. Indeed, the swordsman is doing his part to achieve the goal set by the Ice Maiden. Following his path through the dungeon, he hears from Iris that he is known as the talentless boy who can't use magic. Curiously, the girl calls him veteran, which Wil had never heard before. However, Iris is 2 years younger than him, so it makes sense. What doesn't make sense to him is someone not treating him with disdain for not having talent in magic. But the girl doesn't feel she could belittle someone who saved her life. Even if Wil doesn't know how to use spells, she has a sincere respect for people with their own gifts. Speaking of gifts, that's why she came to fulfill the request, because she wants to do everything to help the Vander magic besides wishing to be one of the people who support the sky. Hearing this, Wil remembers that his civilization still doesn't know the real sky, and that his world remains hidden. The magical energies of the Vander magic cover everything, creating a false sky, the Great Barrier. According to history, when this barrier falls, the world will be engulfed in darkness again, beginning a new calamity. The Academy students strive to carry out the Vander magic missions not just out of respect and admiration, but also to protect the sky. Lost in his thoughts, Wil hears from his new colleague that she has had the pleasure of meeting Lady Elferia. One day, she was trapped in a terrible dungeon surrounded by monsters, isolated and defenseless. Iris was certain she was going to die at that moment, until all the creatures around her were frozen out of nowhere and a beautiful ice lady emerged from behind all that darkness, showing unparalleled kindness and genuine concern for the girl. On that day, Iris had the chance to talk about various things with Elferia, and since then she does everything for her. That's why she came down here to hunt these frozen wanderers, even though she hasn't encountered any so far. Regarding that, Wil mentions that these monsters leave ice fragments behind when they move, and that normally they are between half a mile and a mile. However, these are more than double that. According to his perception, there's something powerful in the depths of this floor, probably in a location where the student's search accessory can't detect. Iris questions how this boy can know all this without using magic, so he explains that magic is very important, but it's not the only thing that exists, especially not inside a dungeon. Even Wil has experienced experienced though not recognized by others, and this kind of thing can compensate for the rest on many occasions. Already knowing what they are going to face, the boy puts on his glasses and prepares for the enemy's arrival. When that happens, he quotes Queen Mercedes about transforming the unknown into the known. Iris is astonished to see a frozen Rex in front of her, the highest form of the frozen wanderer. An enemy worth 6 credits, one of the highest rewards. To justify its fame, the Rex attacks with its freezing rays, so Wil leaves Iris behind and charges at the creature. Iris points out that physical attacks don't work against this enemy because anything that touches it is instantly frozen. The only way to deal with one of them is by using long-range magical attacks. Even with this information, Wil doesn't waver for a moment because he has encountered monsters of this type many other times. With this experience under his belt, he charges at the frozen Rex using his known speed of movement. The Rex tries to hit the boy with its ray, but Serfort manages to get under the monster, a very disadvantageous position for it because a creature of this size has no defense against that. Not knowing what to do, the Ice Rex fires lasers throughout the dungeon, putting Iris in a tight spot. She hides in a sheltered spot to avoid being crushed by the shards, while Wil navigates the battlefield and throws Rosty's magical item at the opponent. This item was a rope that the boy uses to wrap the Rex's body completely. As he ties up the monster, Wil reflects that it is vulnerable to fire and explosive attacks. In the midst of this thought, the Rex breathes an icy blast that nearly freezes its opponent, but Wil activates his device, sparking at the origin of the rope, which spreads to the magical items, exploding like grenades on the Rex's body. The explosion shatters the monster into ice pieces that fly around the cave, alarming Iris Churchill, who tries to shield herself from the vast impact. After defeating the enemy, Wil couldn't expect any less from his friend's magical items. In fact, he has a lot to thank for when he gets home. Impressed, Iris notes that this is the talentless guy she always heard about, completely changing her demeanor, transitioning from a shy and harmless girl to an analyst on duty. Even her voice changes to verify that the difference between the rumors and the reality of this boy is immense, and this will be a shock when she reports this information. After all this event, Wil calls the girl to leave, and she regains her reserved manner to accept the proposal. Later at the Wizard Tower, Mercedes, Collies, and Iris walk through the vast corridors while pondering that Wil Serfort can't use magic, but compensates for this deficiency with great creativity and other gifts that aren't necessarily as valued in this society. Besides that, even though young, he has battlefield experience and has proven his capabilities. It's undeniable that Serfort isn't a talented wizard, but he's a warrior with a lot of potential. After reviewing all her mental notes from the dungeon, Iris Churchill presents herself to the 4 Vander Mages: Carriot Incendia Weissman, Eleanor Alf, Zio Thorsius Rienbolt, and Elferia Albus Serfort. The subordinate asks if the mages are busy, and Carriot responds that they are not. As usual, they are in a meeting just to keep up appearances. After all, if the barrier were to be broken now, the world would be lost. Zio emphasizes that these celestial invaders who are watching them from the other side of the sky would certainly cause a lot of trouble considering their numbers and strength now. Eleanor believes it's necessary to recruit more promising newcomers for the Day of Destiny because they can't allow what is written in history to come true. Turning his attention to the messenger, Zio asks what she found useful, so Iris reports that she found an interesting being in her observation at the academy, the young student known as the talentless Wil Serfort. Despite not possessing magical power, Iris recommends a position for the boy in the tower. Carriot and Eleanor find it absurd, while Zio likes the idea. Eleanor doesn't want even more inferior beings around her, because that would take her discontent to the limit, but Zio believes his colleagues are too rigid in their ideas. He would accept even a dwarf if he is useful to the cause. Because of this thought, Eleanor sees Zio as a lawless barbarian and doesn't understand why this man has the right to this seat. Carriot asks the two to calm down and points out that the day of the Great Magic Festival is approaching, and it might be good to wait for this event to make a decision regarding this. Zio agrees because the strong will prove their ability on this day, and if they don't succeed, that's part of the game. Having said that, the 3 Vander Mages leave, leaving only only Elfaria who hasn't said a word throughout the meeting. Iris comments that the boy she mentioned is really interesting, so the Ice Maiden states that she is waiting for her friend. The next day, the students are put to the test competing for the 7,200 credits they need to advance to the higher institute out of the 12,000 available in the academy. This is a necessary step on the path to becoming a Vander Mage. Sion Ulster, despite his arrogance and recent humiliation, remains promising and continues to cause havoc with spells like the Serpent Flames. Colette Loire tends to be more discreet, but her talent doesn't go unnoticed by her peers. Using the stone tears, Colette crushes the golems that oppose her during the exercise. After the test, Sion passes with 9,889 credits, while the girl secures 7,340. Now it's Wil Serfort's turn, who has a potential that people sadly have no idea exists. With a useless wand in hand, Wil tries to manage without his silver sword Moria, which is what truly sets him apart from the others. As usual, some classmates make fun of him for being a student at a magic school trying to solve things manually. When Serfort takes a hit from the golem and is knocked out of the battle, the laughter around him grows even louder. Also tested, Lahanna Owenza uses her lightning squadron to form a line of electric projectiles that tear through her opponents, while Wignall Lindor conjures the claws of Gale, giving the golems no chance. Impressed by their performance, the girl scores 10,100 credits, while the elf reaches 10,075. Finally, Julius Rienberg steps into the hall, producing small ice lances that fly towards the opponents and stick to their armors. Each piece of ice then takes the form of a rose, and under the mage's command, the frozen flowers spread and freeze the struck enemies, including those available for other students to test against, angering the competitors. Nonetheless, Julius earns 10,048 credits. Lahanna is pleased that none of them have gotten rusty. Wignall didn't think otherwise, as the moment of revelation is near. Julius arrives uninvited and declares his rivalry against the two. With his new secret method, he's confident he'll defeat the pair in the blink of an eye. To provoke his rivals, he throws an ice rose into the air, which both Wignall and Lahanna eagerly shatter with their wind and lightning spells respectively. The woman pays no attention to the challenger and runs off, while the elf responds that he can't wait for a confrontation. Meanwhile, the students around observe the scene, convinced that Miss Perfect and Master Wignall will enter the higher institute. Similarly, everyone knows that these two and Julius are the only ones who scored over 10,000 credits. Sion Ulster, of course, feels the envy of being left behind, while Wil notes that the student scores highlight each one's strength. Speaking of which, the 5,405 points he earned aren't even enough to graduate, let alone enter the higher institute, and this is Wil's final year at the Rigarden Magic Academy. Kiki approaches the boy to console him, but starts growling when Julius Rienberg arrives with his two cronies. The Ice Mage manages to be even more despicable than Sion, telling Wil to get out of his way because he can't stand the presence of a failure. Worse still, Wil lowers his head and even apologizes, while the two cronies comment that surely a scout will see Julius's talent and put him in the Grand Magic Festival. With a certain sadness in his eyes, Wil Serfort remembers that it's the season for that event. Speaking of which, at lunchtime, Colette comes over and takes charge of her best friend, pointing out that the chance to advance to the higher institute through traditional means is gone, so the boy should focus on the Grand Magic Festival. Even without the 7,200 credits, some students have already gone to the tower by being recruited by scouts. Wil knows it's true, but the festival season is when things get intense, with everyone trying to turn the tables at the last minute. This event takes place every 2 years at the Magic Academy, consisting of various competitions among the students, while high mages descend from the tower to recruit those who catch their interest. According to Colette, it's practically a competition among students from different tower factions, and what you do there at the academy defines whether you'll ascend or not. Among the factions are the wand of the lightning lord Thorsius Fass, the sacred wand of the elf Elif Conan, the wand of the flame emperor Incendia Barum, the wand of the ice maiden Albus Vina, and lastly, the current Vander Mage leading the four factions is the sovereign wand of light Materia's Noah. If a student is accepted into one of these factions, they will be admitted to the tower. Regardless, Wil responds that it's almost impossible to skip graduation and be called directly there because you would need to develop a magic that would put a high mage to shame, but his friend believes in his potential, so she thinks he will be called by an observer. Wil thought observers were just one of the 7 legends of the Academy, but either way he'll just help organize the event as he has in all previous years. Colette insists he should put himself out there because then everyone will discover Serfort's real capability and start to respect him even if he's different from the others. That said, Wil recalls trying that in his second year, which didn't go well as the crowd threw all sorts of junk at him, accusing him of cheating. Colette remembers that it was the 50th festival known as the worst in history, and Wil came out traumatized. After lunch, the pair observed the courtyard through the cafeteria window. Around them, students practiced magic crafting and guardian summoning. The scent of the Grand Magic Festival was in the air, so Colette wants her friend to participate because in addition to having scouts from outside Rigarden, if they don't make it to the tower, they might pursue another career. Wil also has to sell his abilities. The issue is that he knows this well, and is aware that he can't even use magic to begin with. Speaking of fish, the boy is like a fish out of water with his silver sword Moria gathering dust in favor of a wand that serves only as a decoration. Suddenly, Colette senses a hidden barrier near some cabinet behind them, so she puts Kiki to identify the hidden element and break the spell. Inside this cabinet, there was a huge spiral staircase descending into the darkness. Down below, students were gathered to place bets on who would win each competition at the festival. One of them bet 300 on Julius, while another put 500 on the elf Wignall, and another went even further, betting 800 on Lahanna. Walking through the hidden basements of the Academy of Magic, Wil and Colette come face to face with Sion, who immediately becomes aggressive without reason. The girl points her wand at him and warns that if he messes with her friend again for no reason, she'll get really pissed. Wil is curious to know why Sion is there since he doesn't seem to be betting, but the guy is too defensive, just wanting the 2 intruders to leave quickly. Lyril and Gordon, the fire mage's friends, mock the redhead for being frustrated that the Academy's 3 most promising mages are taking all the bets, leaving him thoroughly furious. When Sion tells them to shut up, it was loud enough to catch the entire basement's attention. Colette doesn't let up and keeps teasing the mage for this, so he pretends it's no big deal, especially since he hasn't lost to the Academy of Magic's trio of darlings yet. According to Sion, he's only behind in the overall score because he failed the written test, but since then he's been training non-stop and guarantees he won't lose to anyone. That said, when he comes to his senses, the sorcerer remembers he doesn't owe anyone an explanation and gets annoyed with himself for justifying anything to others. He then leaves quite irritated. Wil looks back at the clandestine bets and understands the reason for all the excitement, since this event usually stirs up the students. Later, after classes end, Colette invites Wil to the dungeon, but he has to work at Gina's tavern at night and can't go. When night falls on Slumland Street on the outskirts of the capital Urbis, Rigarden Gina's tavern receives exhausted miners as usual. The shouting could be heard from as far away as the smell of alcohol and sweat, but Wil kept a smile on his face to serve the dwarves that filled the bar. One of them is Donnan, who, liking the boy, wanted to know if he was having any problems since he delivers newspapers in the morning, studies in the afternoon, and still works as a waiter at Gina's at night. Wil explains that he can't get a scholarship, so he needs to work to pay the Academy's tuition. At this point, the tavern owner tells the boy to stop chattering and throws in his face that his co-worker is working much harder. Fresh and radiant amid the smell of foot odor, Rosti served the customers with elegance and subtlety by mixing his service with the practice of magic. Helping out Gina after the last waiter quit, Wil's roommate seems to do better at the job than his friend, who is more experienced. However, even if he's clumsy, Serfort is loved by the tavern's clientele. After the shift, the waiters stay to wash the dishes, and Rosti asks if Wil shouldn't look for another job because dwarves aren't known for paying their employees well. However, the swordsman likes Donnan and the other guys because they have always accepted him well. That said, a spoon falls and the waiter kneels to pick it up. At the same time, Julius nervously enters Gina's tavern because he'll have to drink in this dump since no other bar is open in the area. When he sees Wil in a waiter's uniform, that's when he gets cocky, even going as far as to say that failure suits the barbarians well. Donnan loses his cool with the kid and has to be calmed down by the buddy beside him, but Julius doesn't care. He still adds that the dwarves are an inferior race that came from another world and can only live here by the goodwill of others. Hearing every word, Wil reflects that the dwarves' world was destroyed by the celestial invaders, which forced them to come here. Unlike the elves, they are treated with contempt, and the worst part is that the prejudice means they can't lay a hand on a mage or things could get ugly for their race in Rigarden. Using this to their advantage, the three sorcerers mock the dwarves' beans and the stench of the clientele, so Wil can't take it anymore and demands they take back everything they said. The dwarves' beans growing in infertile soil are a symbol of the race's willpower as part of their character. According to Wil, this isn't the kind of thing that can be belittled. In response, Julius kicks the plate of beans onto the waiter. Wil Serfort grabs both of them by the collar and slams their faces into the ground. Happy to vent, Julius turns the tavern into an ice arena, attacking Wil in every way. The dwarves who had nothing to do with it end up caught in the crossfire. In the middle of the fight, Serfort is immobilized and sees an ice flower growing on his chest. Donnan warns that this is going too far, while Rosti hides his wand, waiting for the right moment to act. In any case, looking into Wil's eyes, Julius trembles slightly and decides that ending the magic less here wouldn't be fun, so he challenges Serfort to enter the Grand Magic Festival. In turn, the swordsman breaks the ice that bound him and grabs the mage's wand, demanding that he apologize for what he said about the dwarves if he is defeated. Sometime later, the sound system at Urbis Rigarden School announced to the students, "Improve, compete, and strive." In the waiting room, Wil tried to focus for the start of the most anticipated event of the year. After repeating this phrase, immortalized by the school's founder Mercedes, the headmistress initiated the Grand Magic Festival. As the fireworks were set off, Raj Holland, one of the scouts from the fire faction, ordered his colleagues to start scouting for talented students. Meanwhile, some students competed in the sky race, where Lahanna dominated the competition and pulled ahead. According to 6th year Palm Snoke, it looked like the girl was going to take the trophy. Flip Mardo commented that it was no wonder she was on top. The headmistress remarked to an assistant that the scouts mingled in the audience had a gleam in their eyes, to which the young Iris Churchill responded that this was the only event they attended, so they were making the most of it. Meanwhile, Lahanna was defending her fortress mounted on her winged beast after setting a new record time in her second consecutive victory. Iris then excused herself as she had a task to complete and something personal she wanted to achieve. In another part of the school, Sion's friends motivated him to give his best in the race to the crown. He of course couldn't think otherwise, as he had a girl to impress. One day, Colette Loire approached Sion asking him to join her team. Sion then believed that Colette finally realized she needed him to win the competitions, and naturally she had to choose him over the failure Wil. However, when he entered the waiting room, he saw the girl next to Serfort himself and immediately threw a fit at his teammate. Colette explained that to participate in the race to the crown, they needed to have at least 21,000 credits combined, so the only way for Wil to join was by inviting the redhead. Sion was furious at having to help the boy against his will until Julius Rienberg appeared behind him in the corridor, chilling everyone with his malicious smile. Simultaneously, Sion was infuriated that Wil had simply ignored his words, and this was the second time he had to swallow being humiliated by this boy he always considered talentless. Meanwhile, Mike Mayes, the event's presenter and narrator, officially started the Magic Festival by introducing one of the commentators, Wil Serfort, the most hated teacher in the school, cunning and sinister. After making these disparaging remarks, Mike Mayes asked into the microphone why on earth they had him narrate the event alongside this heartless viper. In response, Edward told the narrator to prepare a coffin for his next class. Shaking in his boots, Mike announced the main event of the day, the race to the crown, calling for the presence of the elven faction members. At that moment, the positioned elves united to pronounce the words for a joint enchantment called Magnatura's Ringhall, which conjured around the stadium the different types of fields needed for the games, such as volcanic, swampy, rocky, grassy, and forested zones. Unlike other events, this competition would be divided into teams of 3 members, where each team started at the extreme edge of the zones and had to make their way to the central stadium where the crown awaited, with the first team to capture it winning. Besides the natural obstacles, elite teachers would set traps for the students. According to the narrator, it was allowed to take the shortest path to the stadium and hinder other teams. Edward commented that the difficulties in this competition were a way to train the students for the dungeons, while Mike added that among the talented students participating, Team 12 led by Wignall Lindor and Team 9 led by Julius Rienberg were the most popular. Mike had bet all his money on the elf, which made the teacher beside him question what on earth he was talking about. Ignoring the commentator, the unstoppable narrator continued and announced that on the other hand, the least popular team was Team 6, where a potential winner Sion teamed up with the talentless Wil Serfort. All the students laughed at Wil as usual, while Rosti lamented that this was happening to his friend. With the initial presentation over, the students were placed in their spots in the rocky zone, and Werkner tried to convince Wil not to participate, but the boy was determined even though he was a laughingstock to the students of the magic school. Without further justification, the swordsman turned and followed his path, making the teacher realize it was pointless to try to change the young man's mind at this point. Be that as it may, all the participants were now on board, and there was no turning back. Thus, Mike Mayes announced the start of the race to the crown. Right at the beginning, Julius's team encountered several steel blocks in their path, which soon transformed into a real army of giant golems blocking the group's way. Simultaneously, Wil Serfort set off with his team towards victory amid the mockery of the magic school student. As Flip Marteau recalled in the practical class, that guy couldn't even scratch one of those golems. However, with Colette's help, Wil now had a spell in his hands that could turn the tide in his favor in this competition. Not knowing how to use a wand, the swordsman was gifted by his friend with a spell called Gauntlet, which granted him a gauntlet capable of causing a tremendous impact on the row of golems. The force Wil applied to the robots was so great that the magical visor displaying his team was overwhelmed by powerful electrical discharges that blinded the entire audience. Among the spectators, Palm Snoke and Flip Marteau swallowed their words after mocking the magic-less boy so much, along with the entire audience who couldn't believe what they had just seen. On the contrary, Werkner lamented the occurrence, as this was precisely what he feared would happen. Amid the bluish flames formed by the golem's devastation, Wil Serfort found a way to showcase his strength without breaking the tournament rules, since his gauntlet was a result of magic unlike his sword. However, amidst yet another inexplicable demonstration of power by that student always considered the school's laughingstock, Sion Ulster's mind bubbled with humiliating memories he had experienced. According to him, death would be better than being saved by someone like that. Despite having fought so hard to be stronger, at the end of the day, it seemed Wil somehow managed to stay one step ahead. To the audience's surprise, Team 6 is leading the competition with the most unlikely trio in the championship. As they advance, more obstacles appear in their path, this time shooting upwards at the competitors. Wil uses his strength to create a barrier from the rocky terrain to protect himself, along with his above-average speed to dodge the stones. Beside him, Colette Loire combines her blood seal bracelet with the Earth Soul Wand once again to empower the team member responsible for clearing the way through the stage's obstacles. With conjured swords at his command, Serfort hurls the weapons at the blocks, destroying them one by one. Finally, with one of the swords in hand, he defeats the last metallic opponent. Sion, unable to comprehend how this is possible, remains lost in his thoughts about Wil. The display of talent is so astonishing that the students who once judged and laughed as usual now surrender to the magicless contender. Similarly, the scouts from the Fire faction are captivated by the competitors' trap detection and combat skills. Edward remarks that these are the moves of someone who spends much of their time in the dungeon, making this experience the main factor in the competitors' almost flawless journey thus far. Lastly, Iris Churchill doesn't hide her support for Wil and isn't afraid to draw attention by being the only voice in favor of the boy in the crowd. Meanwhile, the other teams become aware of the achievements of the group once considered the least favorite and thus hurry not to fall behind. However, the obstacles and traps placed in their path impede most of their progress, allowing Wil, Colette, and Sion to remain in the lead. Julius, effortlessly clearing the way with his freezing ability, is alerted by his teammates that Wil Serfort is speeding towards the crown, but the Ice Mage is unconcerned. Regardless, Team 6 has just arrived at the next stage, the Enchanted Forest. Ahead of the competitors, a powerful chain of circles forms in the air, putting the group on alert. Thinking quickly, Wil uses his swordsmanship to nullify all the spells, simultaneously manipulating their positions so that the magical circles attack each other instead of his team members. Faced with yet another display of skill and cleverness, Mike asks the commentator's opinion on this, but Edward merely clicks his tongue, frustrated to see his least favorite student standing out so much in the event. Despite achieving great results, Wil knows that as the stages progress, the path narrows, increasing the chances of clashing with other other teams. According to his prediction, things get serious upon reaching this forest where the going gets tough. The point is, being in the lead, they have the advantage of the terrain to set an ambush for the second place, and that's what Serfort intends as the next step, because surely Julius Rienberg is coming with great momentum. However, reality hits as soon as Wil decides to follow this strategy. An ice spear appearing out of nowhere pierces the forest and hits the swordsman directly, but only his cloak is torn in the process. Though he remains unharmed now faced with Julius, there is no guarantee that the magicless will come out unscathed from this battle, especially against the main opponent he has faced so far. Moreover, the boy was alone in the forest, which could mean his colleagues are hiding somewhere. With no time for idle chatter, Julius conjures a series of ice spears that appear in the air and shoot towards the opponent. Similarly, Wil now had no time to cry over spilled milk, because his rival was before him, and the attack he imposes is overwhelming. A slight misstep could cost the entire competition. Therefore, the only option is to face the ice mage head-on. Speaking of which, a sorcerer who could perfectly counter Julius's specialty has just entered the fray. Sion Ulster, with all his hatred reflected in the flames emanating from his body, melts the ice created by the adversary in a display of what's to come. However, from the moment Sion begins to utter the words of his incantation, along with a powerful layer of flames forming around him, Colette feels that even Wil will be hit by that power, so she asks her friend to flee as soon as possible. As soon as Ulster forms the Ignite Bertollian ability in his wand, he throws a massive layer of fire at Serfort, forcing Colette to raise an earthen wall to save the boy's life. The impact caused by the explosion could be seen miles away from the middle of the forest, driving the event's commentator mad. As the dust settles, Wil walks through the complete devastation of that part of the forest until Sion reappears amidst the chaos he caused. After seeing the fire mage aim at both the enemy and the ally, Colette demands an explanation from her team member. Sion replies that he let himself be used up to this point, but now it's time to reclaim his position as the protagonist of the competition. With that said, he wants to fight Wil Serfort here and now. Wil doesn't understand why, but the mage attacks without further explanation. Colette tries to intervene, but Julius raises an ice wall around the combatant. Additionally, he attacks Colette directly, but Wil can't see up close what happened because Sion is on his tail. He tries to convince his supposed ally that this is not the time for this, but the sorcerer's ego is greater than the team spirit. Realizing this once and for all, Wil Serfort retrieves his sword and prepares to face Sion Ulster. Some time ago, Wil walked through the school with a paper stuck to his back that read, "I am talentless and worthless." Sion had always found the boy pathetic, so pathetic that it was painful to witness his tragedy. That's why the mage decided to make the situation less painful to watch. After burning the paper off his back, Sion arrogantly declared that he would allow Wil to be one of his subordinates so that he wouldn't feel miserable all the time. But Wil couldn't care less about what Sion said and continued on his way. Sion, however, wasn't about to be ignored, so he chased after Wil and grabbed his shoulder, because if there's one thing he couldn't tolerate, it was being overlooked. Wil told him to get out of his way, which Sion reluctantly did. Still, he followed the solitary boy around the school, reflecting on how despite all that Wil had suffered, he never saw his peers as bad people. From that day on, Sion Ulster began to despise Serfort. Now he expresses that disdain by hurling fireballs at the swordsman, which homed in on him like guided missiles, forcing him to dodge as best he could. When Sion conjured a ring of fire, he managed to trap his opponent's leg, but Serfort quickly cut himself free with his sword. Through the power of Ignis Rooks, Ulster kept up the relentless attack, never letting up against his rival. Frustrated with how Wil was only defending himself, he ordered the boy to use his survival instinct to fight back, but Wil refused. He said they were on the same team after all. Besides, he had made a promise to Lord Donnan and the others. Hearing this, Sion's anger didn't subside, in fact it only grew. He kept provoking Serfort, trying to force him into a direct confrontation. Wil began to wonder if fighting the mage was his only option. Meanwhile, the entire confrontation was being broadcast live to the arena, where the announcer Mike Mayes remarked that Team 6, which had been doing so well, now had two of its members fighting each other. Mike asked Professor Edward for his opinion on the matter, and Edward replied that regardless of the reason, team members fighting should be out of the question. Even considering the principles of the race to the crown, it was likely that the tower's overseers would see this as a sign against them. With a devilish expression, the professor commented on how deplorable the situation was. Mike, who had been listening intently, began to sweat at the sight of the professor's sinister face, realizing he was pleased with the chaos. Around them, some spectators noted that Ulster had been advancing brilliantly, but as he was still just a boy, the situation had clearly gone to his head, even though he was ranked 4th in his class by credit count. A student sitting next to Rosti mentioned that she had never seen teammates fighting each other before, and the boy agreed, concerned about what might happen next. Soon after, Iris Churchill arrived and introduced herself as a new student who could get along with anyone at school. She wanted to sit with the group, and according to her, it had been quite a while since she last saw Rosti. The boy didn't mind, so Iris sat down and started cheering for Wil. Rosti hadn't expected her to root for anyone in particular, as he had always seen Iris as someone who just went with the flow. But she admitted that she had learned about Wil from someone, and at first wasn't very interested. But after showing her pendant, she assured them she was thoroughly obsessed. Speaking of which, Rosti remembered that Wil was now fighting Sion, which made him a popular guy at school. Iris asked if Rosti was also rooting for Wil, and he confirmed without hesitation that he loved that kid more than anything. Meanwhile, Colette was trying to evade Julius's ice traps. Her intention was to stop the fight between the two members of her team, but the ice mage was determined to block her path. Julius observed that if the girl kept running, no one would consider her worthy of the title Princess of Earth, and this comment infuriated Colette more than anything. The next time he said that she made it clear he'd be in for a beating. Regardless, Rienberg's ice spears continued to fly across the field toward her, and she finally lost her patience with the projectiles, raising a small earthen wall to avoid having to dodge them. However, Julius took advantage of her movement to activate a trap beneath her, causing a massive explosion. This unusual situation started to worry Flip and Palm Snow, especially since they saw multiple Juliuses scattered across the exam territory. In front of Emma Clever's group, there stood the Ice Mage. Similarly, he appeared before other teams spread out across the battlefield. When Wignall Lindor received an unwelcome visit from Rienberg, the elf greeted his rival with a cynical smile. Julius had declared war, and was simply following through on his word to confront his enemy, ready to use the secret weapon he had mentioned to crush everyone. But first, the elf decided to return the favor of Julius's favorite conjured flower. Using his wind magic, he replicated the flower, which floated through the air and caught the Ice Mage's attention. Meanwhile, a magic circle appeared beneath Julius, and its activation instantly shattered the enemy's ice clone. Behind the elf, Terry Foro and Karen Maney wondered why Julius had come there. Wignall picked up a piece of his rival's ice and noted that this trick up Julius's sleeve was from Vander Magic. With that, the commentator got excited as he narrated the duel between two of the institution's most powerful students, and he had expected nothing less from Master Wignall. No wonder he had bet on the elf. Amidst all this, two field aides from the Elven faction were watching the event. Lefia Virides, the one in white, asked what her colleague thought of the elves participating in the event, and Filvis Chalier replied that Wignall neither exceeded nor failed to meet expectations. In any case, Filvis was only interested in leaving as soon as possible, because the event's atmosphere was unbearable for an introvert like her. Lefia recalls that it's not possible because this is a festival for the inhabitants of paradise, the Rizanth. In fact, they should be more concerned about reporting the situation to Miss Eleanor. Among the crowd, Gordon Valley listens as some students around him debate whether Wignall or Julius will emerge victorious, even though Sion's group has come far, but ended up fighting among themselves, putting their advantage at risk. Speaking of which, Gordon doesn't understand what got into Sion. It's understandable that he despises failures, but behaving this way at the grand festival seems a bit too much. Beside him, Lyral Mars empathizes with Ulster, considering that he's trying to get expelled from school for not achieving what he wanted. Speaking of him, the Fire Mage is creating havoc around Wil, who is exhausted from dodging the incessant attacks of his opponent. From a very young age, Wil Serfort has been tormented by Sion, and he never understood why. Wil had never done anything wrong to the boy, and above all, he always saw himself as a great failure, which is why he understood never being accepted, but Ulster's disdain was something beyond his comprehension. On the day Sion burned the paper on his classmate's back, Wil looked up at the towering Maja Vander and knew that despite everything he was suffering, he couldn't afford to take his eyes off his grand goal, which is to stand at the top of that place beside Elfie. Indignant at not getting the attention he demanded, Sion launched a fireball at the swordsman. Likewise, Wil is receiving the same affection from his friend right now, and if he doesn't stay sharp, he could end up as toast. As Sion keeps raising the stakes, he summons Halkan Ardenas, the fiery falcon. Seeing a guardian attacking him, Wil goes on high alert and leaps after driving his sword into the ground, attempting to clip the bird's wings. If successful, this would be his chance to finally reach Ulster, but the guardian quickly regenerates and resumes its attack. Faced with this, Wil needs to destroy the firebird's core, otherwise nothing else will work. As the falcon swoops toward its opponent, Sion hurls flames at Wil with all his fury. Blinded by rage, he pours all his power into his attacks. Wil knows that guardians are usually employed to defend and buy time for the user to cast a spell, but Halkan Ardenas is attacking from all sides. In the arena, both the commentator and the narrator are in awe of Sion Ulster's skill. Not only can Sion cast a high-level fire spell, but he can also summon a guardian. Raj Holland, one of the scouts from the fire faction, asks for information on this student, and his colleague informs him that he is the heir of House Ulster, master of flame magic. Holland acknowledges the boy's talent, but notes he's still behind Lahanna Owenshouse and the top three. Regardless, the scout recognizes that Sion has exceeded expectations, and for this reason he requests that Lord Cariot, the Emperor of Flames, be informed that this year's crop is excellent. Meanwhile, Ulster becomes furious when he realizes that Wil is evading all his tricks. Nevertheless, he belittles his opponent, saying he was better when he defeated the evil sentinel. Unfazed, Wil questions why they're doing this, as there's no reason for the fight, but Sion is enraged, wanting to know why the boy doesn't resent him, even after being so humiliated all this time. Serfort admits that he doesn't like Sion, and is furious, having lost count of how many times he wanted to take revenge on the mage, but now his focus is on defeating Julius. Still irrational, Sion remains obsessed, admitting that he can't stand even the mere existence of Wil, because even without any talent, the guy simply doesn't give up. Moreover, he's always looking everywhere except at Sion, which only fuels his anger further. Finally, Ulster screams that he will no longer be ignored. He wants Wil to look directly at him. Hearing this, Serfort is left speechless, as he realizes how the fire mage truly sees him. From a young age, Wil never asked to be accepted by Sion, but deep down that's all he ever wanted. But now that recognition is on the table, the swordsman braces himself for the challenge before him. Now that he has the attention he sought, Sion repositions his fiery falcon, while Wil stays alert, ready to seize the first opening the guardian leaves to close in on the mage. However, Sion doesn't stop surprising him, and in addition to sending the bird to attack, he conjures a large-scale destruction spell, launching a powerful double attack. Even so, Wil finds it easy to understand his opponent's movements, and using this talent to his advantage, he calculates the trajectory of each fireball and dances through the blazing shower, dodging each threat until he reaches the guardian and strikes its core, causing the bird to explode. Outraged, Sion vows that the fight isn't over, and now Wil begins to show almost the same fury that his opponent has been relentlessly expressing. The final showdown between the two was about to unfold when Colette finally appears and raises a wall between them. Completely battered, the girl reveals that she managed to strike Julius, but he suddenly vanished. Unfazed by this, Sion observes that the girl is dressed rather indecently for an unmarried daughter of a noble house, and she snaps back, blaming the fire mage for her condition and his petty fight. She then frees Wil to settle the score with Julius, much to Sion's protest, who keeps on nagging, leading Colette to lose her patience and tell him to back off. In the midst of this, Wil pats his companion on the back and thanks her for the help, leaving her flushed with embarrassment. Soon, the swordsman resumes his journey, once again infuriating Ulster. Meanwhile, Mike announces that the main teams are about to enter the stadium. Team 9, led by Julius Rienberg, is the first, and everyone thought the crown was already guaranteed for the Ice Mage until Wil Serfort appears in the arena with a determined expression.